Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest, the sixth, I believe, in the Advanced Propulsion Centre's webinar series, The Road to COP26. I'm Jonathan Murray. I'm the Policy and Operations Director at Zemo Partnership, and I'll be chairing today's session. Today, we will be focusing on energy, how we are powering the way to net zero emissions, the role of alternative fuels, hydrogen, and electricity. Before I introduce our panel of speakers, I'd like to set the scene. Transport is the largest contributor to UK domestic greenhouse gas emissions, responsible for 27% of emissions. Total domestic transport emissions are some 122 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent, the vast majority of it coming from road transport, cars, trucks, and vans. Transport emissions have been broadly flat over the last 3 decades, while other sectors have been reducing their emissions. And so there's still quite a job to be done in this sector. The UK government's Transport Decarbonisation Plan calls for a step change in the breadth and scale of our ambition on transport emissions to reach net zero. This will be delivered through a number of measures, but energy, it's in carbon intensity, how we use it, how we use infrastructure, how we produce vehicles, how we provide fuel for those vehicles will be vital in decarbonising transport. But lower carbon energy also offers an opportunity for production of low embedded carbon products. However, against that, we've got to look at the cost mechanisms, the mechanisms that have driven us towards low carbon, and the carbon price support mechanism, while delivering lower carbon electricity, has also driven electricity prices up. So there's a complicated balance to be struck in decarbonising energy, utilising it in transport, and helping us produce the vehicles that we need for the next generation in the UK. To explore these issues, we have a great lineup of speakers. Susan McDonald, the energy transition lead at Deloitte, will be providing a keynote presentation. And that will be followed by a series of case studies from Lennon from New Holland Commercial Operations at CNH Industrial, Penny Atkins from the University of Brighton, Joe Hobbs from Ryze Hydrogen, Mike Schooling from Indra Renewable Technologies, and Sarah Clements from Element Energy. But before we start, a few housekeeping notes. We have a lot of people with us today online, so to make this manageable, you'll be muted during the webinar. However, we do want to hear from you, so please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen to submit questions. Also, feel free to use the chat function to make comments or to ask for technical assistance if you need it from colleagues. The webinar will be recorded and will be made available via the APC's website after the event, and you'll be notified by email and social media. And finally, at the end of the webinar, we ask you to take a moment to give us feedback via a short SurveyMonkey survey even. So now let's move on to our first speaker, Susan McDonald, Energy Transition Lead at Deloitte, who will be providing a keynote presentation. Susan, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen on the call. I'm a net zero strategy manager within Deloitte's net zero transformation team focused on the energy transition. I'm an electrical and mechanical engineer by background with over 10 years experience in power, utilities and renewables. And I'm excited to be speaking today with you in the context of the energy transition and mobility as part of the Road to COP26 event series. Over the next 10 minutes to 15 minutes, I'd like to explore the topics of energy transition in the context of mobility, providing a backdrop for the industry case studies that we'll hear today. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking through the background to why this is a key subject in the Road to COP26, some of the trends that we're seeing in the sector, both cross-sector and within mobility, what changes that's driving in business models and services for customers, and then just some final comments. The focus of today's webinar is the energy transition in the context of mobility. However, this is just one element of our response to meet our net zero commitments by 2050. Key priorities also include decarbonising heat, land use, biodiversity, for example, that will all need to be considered as part of a systems engineering approach to avert climate catastrophe. We heard from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in August of this year of how human activity has unequivocally changed the Earth's climate, where under all emission scenarios considered, it's expected that the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold increase above pre-industrial times will be reached by 2040, with 2034 being the predicted year, making clear there is no time for delay and no room for excuses. We're now 12 days away from COP26 in my hometown of Glasgow in Scotland, where I'm sure we'll all agree we are counting on government leaders and all stakeholders to ensure COP26 is a success, with a key focus on action and deliverability. What I'll kind of start talking through is the shifts that we're seeing in our energy system and the implications for the changes in mobility. Our energy system is shifting from one that is traditional to technological. Traditionally, power has been generated centrally by highly regulated, vertically integrated utilities whose main mission has been safe, affordable, and reliable power. Sources were mostly fossil fuels such as coal and gas, but also hydro and nuclear. The flow has been one way, delivered by the transmission and distribution networks to passive ratepayers. But there are likely to be more changes in the next 10 years than there have been in the previous 100 as the grid is made smart. Traditional power generation, renewable generation, distribution points, and users will all integrate into a system that has a high level of automation with a two-way flow of electricity and information thanks to advanced communication and digital technologies. The transformation to an efficient, distributed and flexible energy system that encompasses smart grids, smart buildings and smart transport will be many decades in the making. The transition is underway. There already exists a certain level of connectivity through the deployment of millions of connected devices such as smart meters, demand response thermostats and smart streetlights. However, the energy system of the future will need to encompass more. And so the context in mobility, the growing demand to move to zero carbon travel across all land transport in the UK, where the key target to ban the sale of petrol, diesel and hybrid cars by 2035, which would outlaw around 98% of the cars currently on sale, which increases the capacity of current car suppliers and driving the EV industry. There are similar ambitions and regulations that are being introduced for buses, trucks and rail, including the ultra low emission bus scheme, the EV 30 at 30, the electric vehicle initiative, network rail electrification schemes, and Euro 6 emission standards, which will all apply to heavy good vehicles. As a result, to make this happen, there will need to be an overhaul of existing infrastructure and various public and private initiatives rolled out to do this. I think when we kind of take a step back and think about all the transformations that the network is going through, there needs to be that joined up view of how this will work across the UK in an integrated manner, in a systems approach, and one that is both planned, that's going to be sufficient and optimal for future ways of living. And I think we'll hear from some of our industry case studies of the scale of the deployments of new technology. And I think just to put it in context, if we think about the electric vehicle scale, as well as of some new technology around hydrogen, ammonia and e-fuels, I think we've got quite a significant transformation ahead of us, one that's both exciting, but that will rely on coordination and galvanizing stakeholders from all different types of backgrounds. The overall of our energy system, the existing infrastructure and the public and private initiatives will be influenced by a range of future energy trends. However, I'd like to pick out one key one, and that is customer centricity. Energy transition is uncertain by definition. Technological readiness, regulation, and customer behavior are the primary lenses to understand change, of which customers are the most enduring and predictable. It is not just what energy customers use that is changing, but the experiences they want and expect in the future. And that's key to not only understand of how we'll live our lives, but from a business perspective, the relevance of bundles, services, and new forms of customer relationships and partnerships. Customer centricity, we can already see that climate change is changing customer behavior, and companies have to be much closer to their customers. How we spend our time and travel has been drastically influenced and accelerated by events of the last 18 months, a share of which we expect to remain. We know that from our data within Deloitte, that 80% of people expect to work from home 3 times a week. This is driving lower volumes in central locations. And as a result, we're seeing greater value and investment being placed in out-of-city locations. The shift to online and convenience home delivery has also been accelerated and will be lasting. In the UK in 2021, UK customers ordered an average of 3.2 times a month, up from 2.5 times in 2020. Our shopping habits have also changed. 2/3 of Britons shopped local in the past year, and that's likely to continue, with 91% continuing to do so. So with these unprecedented changes in both our buying behaviors as customers and where we spend our time, it's also against the backdrop of unprecedented levels of people claiming welfare and accessing food banks. Affordable propositions are increasingly being sought after, and consumer demand is shifting accordingly. That said, customer trends are driving this, but we need to be able to ensure that we're meeting that with the right technology interventions at the needed time. Overall, these trends and these changes will be catalyzed by data, technology, and innovation. And as I just shared with you, our customer behaviors where we travel are evolving. How we get from A to B is changing. Why we travel is evolving. What we need and expect on our travels will fundamentally shift. And I just want to call out 3 key trends that are changing the business models, as well as our customer behaviors and how we meet them by industry, by government and organizations. The first key trend is in the UK by 2035, 80% of cars will not need to refuel at a service station. The second trend is globally, 3 in 4 new cars will not be personally owned by 2040, changing that relationship that we have with ownership and services and the associated services and insurance around it. And then importantly, carbon taxes and charges are being introduced as a lever to change behaviors. As a result, we're already seeing the transition underway, new markets into the industry. We are seeing new business models and new market entrants coming in to help decarbonizing the sector and to meet these customer demands. And so just to pick out some of the trends that we're seeing to meet these customer demands and help decarbonize the sector, is organizations who own forecourts are really going to have to think around being that flexible refueler and recharger, providing a range of refueling options from electric, hydrogen, petrol, diesel, and methane. We're seeing a much greater trend towards energy as a service, the home energy mobility bundles, making things as simple, convenient, and as affordable, where you can start seeing premium guarantees potentially being offered, where customers are guaranteed to never run out of fuel. Importantly, as we increase our clarity and also our drive to understand what we're buying and the hidden costs and carbon costs behind it, it will be important that businesses and industry are able to provide a complete transparency on the carbon costs of not only fuel, but also non-fuel purchases. And then even just the way how we travel, not just thinking about the physical car that we own, but looking at how our motorways and our roads are optimized, where transportation isn't slowed down by congestion. Wouldn't that be great? You know, optimized in real time, offering different options and creating a much more sustainable future for not only driving, but also I think for those busy lives that we lead, not being stuck in traffic on the motorways. I think there is significant transformation already underway within the UK. And in the next 12 days, we'll see a critical focus on the policy and action needed. But the four things and final comments I wanted to share with you today is, given the wholesale change that is happening, not only to one sector, but all our sectors, and as being an engineer by background, we need a systems engineering approach to coordinate and manage the concurrent, coordinated transformation of these multiple vital and interconnected infrastructure systems. We can no longer rely on policy intervention at point. We need to take a systems approach. Importantly, we need urgent action, not only from an investment and collaboration perspective, but we need to divert investment, particularly in late stage technology development, to accelerate the deployment at scale and de-risk it for businesses and ensure that we are able to meet those net zero commitments that are fast coming towards us. Finally, I think we'd all agree that it is noisy both in the news, it's noisy in terms of the campaigns that we're seeing. It will be vital that simpler communication to customers and consumers are provided, not only to give them clarity of what they're buying, but also ensure that they understand the affordability of the options that they're selecting and how they are contributing to the net zero future. It is with customer buy-in and changing behaviors that we will deliver our net zero future. And finally, it's about opportunities. This is an exciting time. I'm 10 years in my career in engineering, and I remember thinking it was exciting then. It is really important that we engage the current workforce and our future workforce to educate, train, in order to be able to deliver this future. It will require lots of skills, and particularly engineering, data skills, customer and marketing, to ensure we get this right. So thank you very much for your time today. I'm looking forward to the case studies and answering any questions at the end of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan, for a good scene-setting tour of the issues, the trends, and the challenges and opportunities that we're facing in decarbonising transport. And I absolutely agree that if you look back a couple of decades, we were talking about tailpipe emissions, and we were talking about proportion of renewables in energy. And now it's absolutely how we bring systems together, how we have complementing systems using smart energy, smart data to make smart decisions, and requiring the infrastructure to deliver that. So that was a great scene-setting keynote presentation, and we now move on to the first of our case studies. And we now turn to Sean Lennon, Vice President from New Holland Commercial Operations from CNH Industrial. Sean, over to you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning, and thanks to Suzanne for the very good introduction to the topics we'll discuss today. So I'm look after the commercial operations for New Holland Agriculture in Europe. I'm 20 years in the agricultural industry, so we are a bit on the side of what is the normal discussion of the transport industry, the on-road industry, but many of the same challenges we face on a daily basis, and for sure the agricultural industry has a big challenge in front of it to decarbonize itself and to modernize itself for the future that's in front of us. So just to give a bit of an explanation about who New Holland agriculture is. So we are one of the world's largest machinery manufacturers in the agricultural segment. We have a full offering of products across the agricultural machinery sphere. We have basically run mainly diesel engines today from 25 horsepower to almost 1,000 horsepower. So a lot of commonality with the on-road in terms of technology and the diesel technology that we use today. So in our industry, so there's, let's say, many similar market drivers for alternative fuels as there are in the on-road segment. But for sure, the EU Green Deal and particularly Common Agricultural Policy updates are really, let's say, key drivers in the direction to change in the agricultural environment. We also see our customers, so the farmers, are at the beginning of the supply chain, and we see a lot more pressure coming from the upper levels of the supply chain, from the consumer of the agricultural products, so the milk or the meat or the grain, coming really through the supermarkets, that our customers are being challenged to provide a more carbon neutral product already to the supermarket shelves. We also work closely with a lot of municipalities, local governments, where they also have their social responsibility and are asking for machines much more environmental friendly. And then there's a clear trend in the industry that for major contracts now, which we saw in the on-road business in the last years, this is also entering agriculture now. To be in the major contract side, you need to be providing carbon reduction solutions. On the customer-centric part, which I think Suzanne alluded to earlier, it's clear also making money for a farmer has been challenging at times, and we all know that the view is that without subsidies, 60% of the farmers would not exist. So I think this was also part of a key driver, is that when we looked at the alternative fuels, we needed to see a way for optimizing the profit margins of our end customer, improving their cash flow and making them more profitable, not so dependent on government subsidies. So back in 2006, we decided as New Holland brand to launch what we call our Clean Energy Leader strategy. And this was our view to be the brand who led the change in the agricultural industry for cleaner energy. We were the first to launch a 100% biodiesel tractors back in 2007. Then we did a number of innovation development projects, starting with hydrogen back in 2009. Then we moved into the methane power, which we're the one which I'll talk most about today. And we worked also in the more recent time on also some electrical generation on the vehicles also, which helps to improve controllability and efficiency of the vehicles. Where we worked very closely with the Advanced Propulsion Center was where we recognized we had the technology capacity to bring a solution to the market on methane. We always had the challenge of making the business case work. So I think where here we got together with the Advanced Propulsion Center, they supported us a lot in the development cycle, but also putting us in contact with industry experts. And what we discovered through our experience there was Benjamin, which was a startup company, which earlier this year we made a minority investment in, that is working in the area of alternative fuels, and was for sure something that we would not have touched in our normal business, that the contact with the Advanced Propulsion Center brought to us. Now I'm here in Bologna in Italy today. We're at let's say the first agricultural fair of an international scale that's been since the pandemic, and we are launching here the production methane tractor, so the first one in the industry. In terms of technology discussion. So in terms of propulsion, we've worked on hydrogen, and for sure the concept works. I would say long term in the agricultural industry, this has for sure a place. And we put this project a bit on the shelf at the moment, mainly linked to market readiness. The reason we are going really full speed ahead now with the methane power is we have, as a company, a lot of experience from the on-road side, where our sister brand Iveco is the market leader in the on-road segment of CNG and LNG. So we have a lot of experience in that, and we believe the agricultural infrastructure is going to be in place today to allow us to run a methane tractor on farm. Electricity for sure is also something that is interesting in the agricultural sphere, and we have some prototypes at the moment available for assisted electric solutions, which for sure brings a lot of benefits in terms of controllability and the application side. So for sure we see also a place for electric in the agricultural industry, but we are far away from replacing a 200 horsepower plus diesel engine with a full electric, given the challenges of autonomy, vehicle dimension, vehicle weight. So I think there is a place for all of the technology in agriculture, and we see at the moment the methane power as a real place where we can play and we can lead the industry. So this is the tractor we brought into production today. And as New Holland, we have a manufacturing plant in the UK where we produce 15 to 20,000 tractors per year. We are the only major volume brand manufacturing tractor still in UK. Here we've used a lot our experience of FPT Industrial, that is our in-house drivetrain and engine provider, which has a lot of historical experience on the on-road that's helped us to develop the product we have, where we've really focused on not only reducing the CO2 emissions, which is an important element, but also reducing the operating costs for the customer, which we see as a clear customer driver to why they would move to this technology. So two different customer types we have. So today there is biogas plants across Europe, roughly 18,000, which is growing over the last 10 years at quite a fast rate, and where we see a good experience of managing gas. On the EU dairy farm side, we see a much wider potential customer and also a much wider benefit in terms of the CO2 reduction capability that can be delivered. So we see dairy farming as a key area to focus, that also, let's say, has not got the best reputation in the news at the moment in terms of this. So our concept, the energy independent farm, so where we understood that having a vehicle was not going to be enough. So we needed to also work on the infrastructure, and this was why we invested in Benjamin. So a key customer driver here was to capture the methane on the farm, and then either to utilize the methane on the farm or to capture that methane and use it in on-road vehicles. So here we are working on an energy independent farm concept, and just to give you the idea of what benefit this is bringing. So today, average dairy farm with 150 cows is producing roughly 4,500 tons of CO2 equivalent per year. By capturing this using the technology of Benjamin, we reduced by almost 60% the CO2 equivalent emissions on the farm, and then a further reduction by utilizing this methane in either on-farm vehicles or producing electricity on the farm, or using it in the transport sector. So this is where we see not only a machinery movement, but also supporting the customer to capture the methane on farm and utilize it. So as I said, we've got the first in the industry to bring a product to market with the help of the Alternative Propulsion Center. This was really key in bringing this, not only the product itself, but also to bring our connection with the wider energy industry in the UK and some innovative people that have helped us bring it this way. Thank you. I probably took a little bit more time, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sean. And I love that idea of the energy independent farm, bringing the production of the energy to the place where it's going to be used, and with the vehicles to use it. That's a great concept. We now turn to our next case study, which is from Penny Atkins, Principal Research Fellow at the University of Brighton. Penny, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here today, speaking at this webinar. So today I'm going to talk about a case study from the heavy-duty truck sector, thinking about use of hydrogen in that sector. So we've talked about electrification, and it's seen as a real solution here to decarbonising transport. And we see, gradually the world going electric. So on the left-hand side of this slide, this is my electric life. So we have an electric car. I have an electric bike that I commute to work on, fabulous in the headwinds, an electric outboard on our little boat. But I tell you, I wouldn't want to go across the channel using that outboard. And so my view, and many others, is that in actual fact, we're going to need high power, high energy propulsion for the future. So we're thinking here about the applications like really heavy duty trucks, ships, and the agricultural kind of applications that we've just seen. So if we think about heavy duty vehicles, and this is some road mapping that I did with the Transport Energy Network a little while ago, there's a range of technologies that could deliver net zero. So if we look at, we think about this across different kinds of duty cycles. So for our short range kind of transport, so popping about in cities at the bottom of the slide, electrification might really work if we're using low carbon electricity, because the range is relatively short. So the amount of energy you need to store in the battery is smaller. But then if we're thinking about really the heavy duty trucks, the articulated lorries that are delivering our goods across the country, then we need those high energy density energy vectors. So we're looking at fossil fuels phasing out. So there's consultations around phasing out fossil fuels around 2035, being replaced by more sustainable energy vectors. So maybe some sustainable diesel or CNG, like the presentation we've just seen, potentially electricity via catenary, so overhead lines, to avoid having a really large battery, and possibly sustainable hydrogen, and you can use that in either an engine or a fuel cell. So low carbon hydrogen is seen as a key enabler for heavy duty trucks. It's a very cost-sensitive sector. It's very sensitive to durability. We really need those trucks to keep running. And the trucks really need to perform. They carry heavy loads. And we've seen the kind of disruption that can be caused over the last few weeks if our truck distribution system starts to break down. The chaos that we've seen with fuel deliveries over the last few weeks shows just how important it is that this sector works really well. So there's been some work demonstrating low carbon hydrogen, a lot in the bus sector recently. So fuel cell demonstrations are on the road in a range of places. So in Aberdeen, Birmingham, London, funded by Horizon 2020. And locally to us, Brighton Hove buses have been planning to introduce 20 hydrogen fuel cell buses, part funded by the European Commission. However, for heavy duty trucks, which are carrying, you're looking at maybe 44 tons over a really longer range, fuel cells are difficult right now. They're expensive and the durability hasn't been proven in that kind of application. So what might we do? Potentially, you can use engines. Now, BMW offered 7 series powered by hydrogen engines some years ago. We've seen FPT working on hydrogen too. But recent research and modern technology has shown that these engines could actually give zero impact air quality emissions. So this is the vital reduction of NOx and particulates to make them acceptable on the roads now. So this picture at the bottom shows some of the powertrain changes, so the engine changes that you might need compared to an existing diesel engine. So you need to change the fundamentals of the combustion because the air-fuel ratio, so the amount of air to fuel that you need is different. So you need to change your pistons and you need to change your air handling. So you need to change your turbo. And also, obviously, you need to think about the safety measures. However, the evidence from industry right now is that we could have engines on the market and on the road in truck applications potentially by 2025. Now, we know that that changes are happening within our climate really rapidly. So this kind of rapid transition to another fuel could be absolutely vital in helping our transition to net zero. But I think what I'd like to leave you with is that key consideration of any kind of transition to a different energy vector is around the life cycle emissions. So it's very important, if we're thinking about introducing hydrogen in transport, that we need a route to green hydrogen for this sector. There's a large volume of hydrogen that's needed. And if it's going to be any more environmentally friendly than the diesel that we're using right now, it's vital that we have enough of that green hydrogen to go around. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Penny. I lost my mouse then for a moment. That's a great introduction, and I think really brings home the fact that we can adapt current technology, but we've got to look at cost sensitivities, we've got to look at reliability and operation, but we've got to keep our eye on that long-term goal of whole life cycle carbon emissions if we're going to deliver on our objectives. We now come to our third case study, and we're going to turn now to Joe Hobbs, Chief Engineer from Ryze Hydrogen. Joe, over to you.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Hobbs. I work for a company called Ryze Hydrogen. Ryze Hydrogen intends to be a sort of a vertically integrated hydrogen supply business operating from production right the way through to the end customer with hydrogen fuel dispensing, very much focused on the mobility market. And one of the unique things about our business is that we are under common ownership of Joe Bamford, who also owns RightBus, the Northern Irish bus manufacturer. So we can provide the end customer with a very tightly integrated sort of package of fueling as well as the vehicle, so both demand and supply of the hydrogen. So a number of projects have been done all over Europe with hydrogen, and particularly in the UK. They tend to follow to a little bit of this model where you have a vehicle fleet, quite often what we sort of term back to base fleet, so a reasonable sized fleet that comes to a single point every day for refueling. And then we have hydrogen production. When it's renewable, quite often it's electrolysis on site, and then refueling and dispensing of the hydrogen on site. One of the key shortcomings of this is that there's very little resilience. It's a very simple supply chain, but there's very little resilience without doubling up on a lot of the componentry of that supply chain. So for instance, we see places where the electrolyzer capacity, the amount of storage on site is multiple times the daily demand for hydrogen, which increases the effective capital spend and increases ultimately at the end of the day the levelized cost of hydrogen. And we'll come back to that in a second. So the Ryze model is actually slightly different. It's to move the production very much where hydrogen production is best located, whether that's because we have access to renewable energy, and I know this is what I've shown here, but of course there are a number of other methods of producing hydrogen under discussion, whether that's blue hydrogen by carbon capture and storage, where the location is dependent on your ability to sequester that carbon dioxide or otherwise use it, whether that's waste gasification processes, which are very much in their infancy at the moment, or whether it's maybe byproducts from various other industrial processes. We then distribute that to the dispensing location, and we're already doing this for a fleet of 20 buses for Transport for London, where we are bringing a supply of hydrogen into the depot, into a refueling station where it's dispensed. So this keeps the amount of capital spend in the depot at a lower level. It minimises the amount of space, and we know that for a lot of our customers, space is a key consideration. And ultimately, it means that the overall cost of providing that hydrogen is kept low, because the major costs in production are minimised by opportunistic location of that production. So I think this actually goes back very nicely to something Penny said about how different different fuels and different fuels for a net zero future really lend themselves to different applications. And I've always tried to see these as a little bit of a range, really. So you start sort of with your electrification, direct electrification. This is your railways with overhead catenary wires. You've then got sort of batteries, hydrogen, particularly fuel cells, is really a case of electrification, but with a different sort of transfer of that, or a different method of producing that electricity as it's required on the vehicle. And then you've got the more complex, the ammonia, maybe liquid organic hydrocarbons for effectively carriers of hydrogen in a different chemical form. And then, at the other end, you've got synthetic liquid fuels. And I think all of these have a really important role to play in future. So what we see at the here is that, potentially there's an increase in the cost of the fuel or the energy as we go from left to right. This is largely due to the sort of additional steps and additional conversion steps and the efficiencies of those steps. But if you click again, there's another outline. There it is, showing that actually the cost of infrastructure tends to come down from right to left. And so there's a real sweet spot in the middle here, which I think Penny, touched on, that hydrogen fits a lot of applications. And probably when we start looking at the overall, the levelized cost, the total cost of ownership to the end customer, particularly where it fits better into their day-to-day operations, this may provide a significant benefit to the end customer. Okay, next slide, please. So if you just click through, there's a number of items I've put down here, and I've tried to align them with the supply chain above. So I think one of the big challenges here is really both minimizing the carbon impact from that hydrogen production and the transport, but also being able to provide very much a case of being able to provide the end customer with the assurances that that hydrogen meets their carbon emission reduction targets or requirements. To help meet that, that's going to require very close integration, and our company is currently developing a plant at Herne Bay in Kent, which will produce zero carbon hydrogen direct from offshore wind power. But the integration of that hydrogen generation, the storage of hydrogen, as well as the renewables, is a really key part of that project to make sure that it's the positive carbon emission impact that project will that project promises is fully realised. One of the things I came to was redundancy and the need to be able to feed from multiple different sources of hydrogen, which will require sort of operational operational working between different and potentially competing companies. So the optimization and standardization transport methods, again, I've shown mainly road transport as potentially a compressed gas or maybe a liquefied gas, but of course in the future this will expand into pipelines. Standardization of vehicle filling protocols. For hydrogen, this is very well advanced for lighter duty vehicles, but for heavier vehicles, this is still very much a work in progress. And what we can't be doing in 5 years' time is having to individually engineer the station to the vehicle. Customers really should by that point be demanding that any vehicle can refuel off almost any station with maybe a couple of key parameters being matched. And of course, a very important point is minimizing the cost to the end user. And particularly when we're working with RightBus and the customer is bus operators, like Penny said, like Sean said, they are operating a very, very financially sort of slim margin business. They really don't have a huge amount of capacity to take hugely increased costs, so that's really important. So I think just a couple of things we're working on, because one of the key things that we're working on at the moment is with RightBus as part of an APC funded project is both expanding and really helping to educate the end user about hydrogen and about the infrastructure options. But also to help them then sort of, understand the pros and cons of different ways of setting up their infrastructure and how they may wish to go about that to really help them become an informed and confident customer. As I mentioned, we're developing our own renewable hydrogen production, and the real important peak in there is to really sort of help adoption of hydrogen by introducing a seamless customer experience. So a customer who is, comes to us without much technical knowledge and confidence is able to get what they need, what they want, without having to become, a professor themselves in hydrogen adoption. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joe, for an interesting review of the role that that hydrogen can play in transport. And I have to say my hat off to you. Who says men can't multitask? Well done. We now turn to Mike Schooling, Chief Technology Officer for Indra Renewable Technologies. Mike, over to you.
Yes, I'm going to dive straight into detail. So vehicle to grid is kind of where we're focused. We did an Innovate UK trial of 1,000 Nissan Leafs. So we took vehicle to grid from something which cost you kind of £15,000 per charger. It was only suitable for industrial sites. You need a concrete pad to be lowered and a crane to lower in a unit, and we took that to something you could screw on the wall of a domestic house. So just a few of the insights from that really, and where we see that technology going in the future. So as we go more green, the grid is getting more intermittent generation. So that means the sun's not always shining and the wind's not always blowing. So therefore we need to fill the gaps in. So you can fill the gaps in two ways. You can either store energy for use later, or you can have controllable loads. And that's where we come on to with firstly smart charging, where you can turn on and off a large amount of load in the future. And then onto vehicle to grid, where you can actually use that energy that you've stored in the car's battery, maybe through the middle of the night where it's really windy, and then use that during the evening peak when everyone's cooking and kids come home from school and everyone's using energy at the same time. Little sort of infographic at the bottom. So in 2020, we're at 59 gigawatts peak and dispatchable generation of 64 gigawatts, which basically means we had a bit of overhead. If we look at what's currently planned, you see the dotted line on this slide, that takes us through to 84 gigawatts. And basically, it's the electrification of heat and transport which make the difference. So you can start to see that there's going to be a doubter there. So firstly, we need more renewables and more stuff planned by 2050. But secondly, there needs to be the controllable loads and the controllable generation, as mentioned earlier. So that storage comes in there. So the potential of V2G, just to kind of explore this, Hinkley Point C is going to be 3.2 gigawatts. We're then looking at V2G at 4.7 million EVs by 2030, which is where we believe, based on various forecasts, will be. That's 25 gigawatts of dispatchable power from batteries in all of those EVs. That's only half the story. That's so smart charging gives you 25 gigawatts. Actually, you can go full swing with V2G. So you can go from a full discharge to a full charge, or a full charge to a full discharge in fractions of a second. So actually that 50 gigawatts of controllable load, if we connect all these up, is absolutely huge. So you can start to see that just the ability to control electric vehicles in the future actually helps the energy system much more than it hinders it. And then we think there's a revenue tied to that of roughly £3.5 billion by 2030. And that's Imperial College's figures, not ours. So what's blocking this from becoming a commercial reality right now? So next slide, please. So right now it's limited to small trials. We've rolled out just over 1,000 units in the UK. There's a couple of hundred others. And the thing mainly holding that back is the EU adopted the CCS charging standard and mandated that from 2014 onwards. So all new vehicle models from there had to have CCS. The issue is the bidirectional part of the CCS charging standard is still in draft, and it's been in draft for years and years and been promised to us for years and years. And it's technically flawed and poor, what we have seen. So industry's not been engaged in that process, and that is going to cause quite a kerfuffle when people start to roll this out. So manufacturers like Volkswagen are saying, yeah, let's start to roll out V2G, but actually there's no standard to follow. So as a charger manufacturer, we're unable to then follow a standard. You'll end up with interoperability issues. You'll end up with manufacturers and charger manufacturers doing their own deals and doing their own thing. It's going to be a nightmare for a few years. Vehicle OEM adoption. vehicle life cycle builds are generally kind of 7-8 years. So you generally have a mid-term uplift. So you're looking at 3 to 4 years for standard being released to actually all vehicles starting to adopt it. That's going to take a few years. And then you've got the implication of battery warranty and things as well. We mentioned DNA processes. This is the distribution network operator who own the cables and operate the cables coming into your house. The processes for connecting these assets to the grid is improving, but it's still painful, especially in some areas. UK power networks and Western power distribution have been much more engaged, but if you go north of the border into Scotland, it's almost impossible to install one of these units right now. So clearly some movement there is needed in the future. Certification and testing. So there's actually no testing process for CCS right now. It's starting to be talked about, but if you look at CHAdeMO and the previous standards there, absolutely superb testing process. You can't get it wrong. If you pass, it works. What we have for CCS is you kind of get together and have what's known as a testable once a year, where you basically might get a bit of time with a certain manufacturer and you plug in and see if it works and do a bit of hacking around. It's not a mature way of doing these things, and clearly some regulation is going to be needed there to start to bring all these standards together and to force some kind of interoperability testing. Install regulations have conflict with various other standards, so there's clearly some work to be done there. And the install base, actually, it's a skills gap. We need a lot of qualified electricians to go and install this equipment, smart charging and vehicle grid. That's something we need to be looking at as well. So that's my 5 minutes. We'll let you get on to the next one.
Thank you so much, Mike, for your rapid run through of smart EV charging and vehicle to grid, and the importance of getting standards right to provide some consistency for the market. We now hand over to our final presentation from Sarah Clements, Principal Consultant from Element and Energy. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. And hello, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me okay now. I'm Sarah Clements. I'm a Principal Consultant at Element Energy, and we're a net zero carbon consultancy, and we essentially consult on problems across the entire energy sector. So that's everything from hydrogen to buildings, carbon capture and storage, and transport. And I'm in the transport team. So today, my focus is going to be talking to you about how to get drivers who park on street into driving electric vehicles. As you can see from the maps here on the slide, there is a significant public charging infrastructure network across the UK, and the majority of these are fast charge points. You can see from the map about 7 to 25 kilowatts speed, and these are deployed in public car parks, on street and in highway station. And whilst there's a significant charging network, it's really important for us to think about exactly how customers are charging and using these charge points. Essentially, most public charging is actually done at home, and that's people with a driveway or a garage who can install a home charge point and use the electricity from their house and charge in quite a convenient manner, mainly overnight, so that they can access on street, they can access cheap overnight electricity tariffs. And this really raises the question as to what can happen for those people who don't have access to driveways or garages, for those people that park on street or in shared public car parks. And there are two main options for this, really. The first is what we call residential on-street charging. And this is where the local council will install public chargers on the street where people live. And again, like the home charging, generally customers would use this overnight where it's convenient to do so. The other option is what we call a residential charging hub, as this is where you install a cluster of rapid charge points close to a residential area again. And the idea here would be that customers would use the charge points a bit like you use a petrol station, and kind of when you make time can go and top up your electric car. Generally takes about 20 to 30 minutes at the moment. And these charge points, like I said, are a rapid charging speed. But today I'd like to focus on the column highlighted in green, and that's the residential on-street charging. There are a range of on-street charge points available on the market today, and they're all listed here. The first one you can see at the top is a lamppost charger, and this is essentially where you retrofit a lamp column with electric vehicle charge point, and it makes use of any of the excess electricity that isn't being used for powering the lights. The next option is a bollard charger. And so these are quite a bulky infrastructure, but they do provide faster charging speeds and a dedicated electric vehicle charging bay. So generally, customers can easily access these chargers. Then the next group I've called low profile chargers. We've grouped these together because essentially they have lower impact on the streetscape. So the first one is a design from a company called Urban Electric, and that's a pop-up charge point. The next is from Connected Curb, and it's their Armadillo charger, which again has quite a low footprint. It's quite small and close to the ground. And the third is a design from a company called Trojan Energy. It's a flat and flush charge point, and I'll talk a bit more about it later on. And then finally, the row at the bottom there, EV charge channels. Essentially, these are quite low innovation, but some councils quite like them because they're relatively simple. And this is where you have a gully in the pavement, and a customer would plug their charger into their car and then run a wire through the pavement gully and then power the car using the electricity from the house. And essentially the gully just means that there's less likelihood for a trip hazard if you put it in the gully safely. And I'd like to focus just a bit on the Trojan Energy charge points. Element Energy have been working with Trojan Energy and their novel Onstreet charging solution for several years now, really helping them to take their idea into a reality. And the Trojan technology itself is made up of three main parts. The first part you can see in the middle there is a picture of how it looks. So it's a charge point that's slotted into the pavement. So it's flat and flush with the pavement. All of the clever infrastructure is below the pavement surface. So it means that when you're not charging your vehicle, there's actually no infrastructure at the pavement edge, and it leaves the pavements relatively clear. And then in order to charge your vehicle, you plug in what's called a lance, and that's at the top picture. And this plugs into the charge point, and then the other end you plug into the car using a type 2 connector. And then finally, that the picture at the bottom is the Trojan Energy box. So it doesn't look anything kind of particularly interesting there, but essentially it's the grid connection. So how the electricity powers the charge points. And there are 15 charge points that can run off one grid connection. So again, that's quite another unique aspect of the technology, because you can facilitate charging essentially for an entire street off one grid connection. So I just wanted to explain a bit about kind of the process and the project that we are doing with Trojan Energy. So the project is called the STEP project, and it stands for Subsurface Technology for Electric Pathways. And the aim of the project is to complete the first ever installation of these Trojan Energy charge points, with 150 planned across 6 streets in Brent, a London borough, and 4 streets in Camden, another London borough in the north of London. And 5 charge points are currently live on a street in Brent called Mortimer Road, and 5 lances have been distributed to early users. We currently have one user who's actually an Uber driver, quite frequently using the charge point to enable his daily activity and his daily work in his electric vehicle. So it's really nice to see the technology in the street and getting utilised. And interestingly, with this project, we have 3 trial participant types. So we have EV drivers, those that already have an EV, prospective EV drivers, those that are considering, and then observers, those people who just comment on the technology but don't have any intention to use it. And what we can see is track throughout the trial how many prospective EV drivers actually convert to then getting an EV by having the Trojan Energy technology installed on their street. And we've actually seen 4 participants already make the switch and get an electric vehicle so that they can use the technology in the trial, which is great to see. So yeah, that's just a quick whistle-stop tour through on-street charging and the Trojan Energy system. And we have 145 more charge points being installed early next year. So look out for them. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sarah. I have to say the Trojan pop-up charge point, curbside charge point is a fascinating project, a fascinating product. And I'm really looking to see how that can roll out into and hopefully make an influence on roadside on-street charging. Right, we now come to our panel session, when it's your chance to pose questions to our panel. We've had a couple in the Q&A box so far, so please do post any questions there. I'm going to start by turning to our first question, which I think is to Penny, and is from, now I'm going to try to pronounce their name, and if I get it wrong, I apologize. Lucian Penny. So the question I think has popped up is the hydrogen ICE engine that you were looking at using liquid H2?
You can use either, Jonathan. So you can, I was thinking defrost, but that's the wrong word. Liquid hydrogen is really very cold. So you can vaporize the hydrogen before you get to the engine. So they, use either in the same way as you do for methane. And the interesting thing is a study from Zemo recently showed that the well-to-wheels is relatively insensitive to whether you use liquid or very high pressure hydrogen in terms of energy. So yeah, it's interesting. But either, I think storage is really important actually because it's so closely related to the range of the vehicle. So it's something that I think work is needed.
Are there other options there to, as part of that process of basically warming the hydrogen before it gets to the engine, to avoid the thermal shock that would have, I presume, in the engine? Is there opportunities there? Because I recall in the past looking at liquid methane projects where they were using the process of warming the fuel to actually as an opportunity on chilled vans to actually help with chilling the vehicle. Are there any other opportunities that could be taken as a result? Yeah,
you're right. There's a really good synergy between using on kinds of vehicles that have refrigerators on board. So yeah, you're right there. There's a synergy for integration in terms of the vehicle infrastructure, thinking about using waste heat recovery from the engine to help with that, and also then using the cold for the refrigeration processes. Yeah.
We've had another question that's come up, and I think I'd like to bring Joe Hobbs back in to perhaps answer that, and that's about a question from Maurice Kelly, which is tell us about hydrogen storage, gas, liquid, solid state.
Yeah, of course. So I think, and again, Penny touched on one of the big considerations for different hydrogen storage being the amount of energy required to store the hydrogen, and then the amount required to either extract it from storage or the potentially is that may be recovered when you extract it from storage. Most of what is done in Europe, and particularly the UK at the moment, is high pressure gas. And there's a trend to moving to higher and higher and higher pressures for vehicles to get the density to sort of start to match as closely as possible to petrol and diesel for space reasons. The current automotive standards are 350 bar and 700 bar. 350 used mainly more for heavy duty vehicles, and the higher pressure used generally for lighter duty vehicles where space is more critical. Liquid hydrogen is used less on the vehicle. There have been vehicles built, coming to the top of my mind, BMW built a number of liquid hydrogen fuel demonstrators probably 15 odd years ago. And there seems to be a little bit of a renewed interest in it, particularly for heavier duty vehicles. But the issue with liquid is so what's sometimes called the airport problem, the idea that if you leave a vehicle for 2 weeks, you may have issues with most of your fuel boiling off and not being available when required. Solid state. So I'm not an expert on solid state materials and solid state storage of hydrogen, but the ones I have looked at have always come up short, either simply in the material cost or in the weight for weight density of hydrogen which can be stored, or simply in the complexity and the balance of plant required to either absorb hydrogen onto them or desorb it afterwards. I think so, though, the trend will be, from gas through the higher pressures and into liquid, and probably that trend comes with increased power and energy requirements to produce the higher pressures and the liquefied hydrogen, but is traded off with more easier transportation in larger volumes, which will reduce the emissions and the costs of transport.
Thank you very much. I suppose one of the questions and I think perhaps if all our panelists could have their cameras on, you'll feel more of a panel that way, I think. But one of the questions I'd like to ask now, and I think I'd like to sort of pose it a bit wider and perhaps start by coming to Sean first, and then perhaps open it out further, is Sean, I know that in the work that you guys have been doing at CNH Industrial on the tractor projects, you looked at a number of different energy vectors to use. And including methane, including electric, and starting off with biodiesel. How do you see? I mean, I take the point that you're coming from it's great to see this now percolating into off-road mobile machinery and tractors. But how do you see this transition? Do you see it as being from one state, we're using red diesel effectively most of the time, to methane, or is there going to be a market transition? And how do you, as a company, handle that transition?
Yeah, so I think for sure transition over a period of time, and I think one of the slides that Penny showed with the timing of the on-road, we have a very similar chart for the off-road, but with some years of delay and probably some years of anticipation on some parts. I think the customer is going to drive in agriculture a lot. So we see a lot of innovation happening on the customer side that is going to help us to move forward as well. We see the methane as a nearing opportunity, because it's also a problem that the farmer has to deal with on farm. So they have a challenge not only in the propulsion of the vehicle, but also a challenge particularly in the dairy side that they have to manage, or they're going to have a challenge, let's say, with their environmental targets that they have on farm. Electric, we see a place for it, but when you get to the really heavy equipment, we have a similar challenge to the on-road. You start to face the challenge of autonomy and also of weight. Hydrogen, we still see a future, but I think the on-road will dictate a bit this, but also a bit the customer, because in the end, we see a lot of the diversification of farms is going to be into energy creation. So we see already, the solar panels coming up everywhere. Our proposal together with Benjamin working on the gas capture, on the methane gas capture on the farm, if they start to become a localized green source of hydrogen, for sure, then the pull will come to us from the customer to develop also vehicles that can run on this. So I think this is where we go much more to the local source and how the customer produce their own energy, because today many of them are very isolated as well. To move the expansion from a 50 dairy cow to 150 dairy cow, the electricity grid or the gas grid is not present and not strong enough to run what they need to run their business. So this is also an element that's driving them to become energy producers and more energy independent than what the grid's able to provide them today.
Great. And Sarah, to bring you in on this, I mean, it strikes me that Sean's concept of the energy independent farm is a microcosm of what's going to have to happen more widely, where we're not just talking about taking on a new technology to power our vehicles, but we're also talking about how we generate the energy in the first place and how we look for synergies that can come from that energy generation, that how we use it, where we use it, and that's, if you like, a microcosm of what we're going to have to do in the broader energy transport sector.
Yes, exactly right. So obviously there's the energy generation aspect, which we've kind of touched upon today, but then thinking more about transport and particularly electric vehicle charging, we really need to make sure, as kind of mentioned earlier, that we avoid peak times. And as everything transitions to an electricity grid, to extra energy consumption on the electricity grid. So as mentioned as well, not just heating, but also transport and other applications, it does mean that we need to avoid peak times. And avoiding peak times can be achieved by a number of ways, but one of the key aspects that we're exploring at the moment is price signals. So that idea of being able to charge your electric vehicle overnight really helps the energy system, really helps the network, really helps the distribution of the energy. So it's ensuring that those tariffs overnight do incentivize people to plug in their vehicle. And we're definitely seeing that with home charge points, because people have a home charge point, they can plug in and charge their vehicle overnight, especially with smart charge points that can do the timing for you. Where it starts to become a bit more difficult is in the area of on-street charging, which I mentioned already. So because you have charging on street, there is lots of other vehicles that could be parked near a charger. So just because there's an on-street charger on your street, and you'd like to be able to charge it overnight and get access to those overnight tariffs and help the grid, doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be able to. So you can have electric vehicle dedicated charging bays, which we've seen in some local councils, but they tend to create quite a lot of tension with drivers, because obviously at the moment we're still not at peak EVs. So there are a lot of petrol and diesel cars on the road which are competing for space. So alternatively, you can do a Trojan type solution where you have a number of charge points on the street, and that's the case what we see, especially with lampposts at the moment, and no dedicated bays. But the issue there is that you then could have diesel and petrol cars just parked at a lamppost charger or another on-street charger for long periods of a time, and we call it icing, where it just you essentially have an internal combustion vehicle blocking the space. So I think, there are going to be innovations that come to make sure that we're able to use the electricity grid effectively, not for those people who just park at home, but also for those people who do park on street and want to be able to make use of these lower tariffs and benefit the grid. But I think we're going to need to see some extra innovations about how we move those vehicles around on the street and ensure that EVs are parking where there are chargers. And I think over time, we'll obviously see that as EVs grow on the street, you will have less of an issue with the icing problem, but you potentially could have people then hogging the bays. So again, I think there's lots of innovations in this space, and we'll see what happens over the next couple of years. But yes, like you said, yeah, it's definitely kind of a microcosm of energy use within a local area, making sure that distribution doesn't overcome the peak electricity that's available in an area.
And Susan, I wanted to come to you next, because part of this process of bringing these systems together in a capitalist economy that we have is about price signals and how you play with those price signals. So and the financing and getting a return on investment. How do you see the bigger picture of bringing these systems to work together, coming together?
I think for what's really exciting is there's going to be new business models and businesses created through this opportunity. Fundamentally, for traditional businesses, there will be an underlying economic model change. So when you think about the customer archetype in the future, customers will be looking to have that multi-fuel option for their home and that end-to-end service. So we're going from a product end use economic model to one that is service-led. And so, for traditional organizations, they will need to consider whether they want to move into a much more advisory and technological business model. We all know that we are driven end to end through digital enablement and technology to make that customer easy and simple. So I think for organizations who are doing that shift, they will have to get much more comfortable with those kind of less volumetric, so fuel, the fuel going into cars, and actually thinking about the services and bundles around it. I think what's really important when we think about meeting customer demands, which we've spoken about, but I just want to kind of make a point on it, is it will be around being that transition partner for the customer. And it's really who's going to be able to win to be that trusted partner, not only today, but through the next 20 years of both a commercial or domestic customer. It's very complicated, it's noisy, and it's not clear information. So I think for organizations to win that future customer, there's going to be a really key focus of really understanding who your customer is today and identifying which are likely to transition faster, and being able to bring pilots to those faster transition customers to be able to create and deliver service that's mass market. And importantly, what we need to do is, when we think about the infrastructure we're putting in, when we think of sidewalks, when we think of roads, it's vital that we think about the accessibility for all parts of society. I worked very closely with blind and partially sighted charities the last 18 months. And so I think when we think about the infrastructure to deliver a net zero, one of the key things will also be making sure that we make it accessible to customers, make it accessible to customers. But second of all, making sure that how we interact and integrate with the infrastructure is usable and accessible for all members of society.
That's a very good point. Social equity is something that we've got to bear in mind as part of this transition, because it is easy to forget those on lower incomes. I'd really like just to turn now to Mike and think about the role of smart EV charging. And what are the deltas in terms of the price signal that we're going to need to encourage smart charging to be effective? Because it's part of it is a technical issue and part of it is a market issue. What's your confidence in terms of the price signals that will allow a smart energy system to work through smart charging?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of work on this already. So we've launched 2 world firsts in the last couple of months. So the reason Indra exists in the smart energy space, we used to be an on-vehicle technology company. We used to make battery systems for the niche OEMs in the UK. The reason we exist is we did some consultancy work for OVO Energy, who basically said, can you find us a smart charger and integrate it with us, please? And realised nothing exists that meets all the requirements for anything. This is back in 2017. So we went away and developed one. Firstly, time of use tariffs, which are accessible to end users, they're already there. So you look at Octopus Agile, Octopus Go, and the kind of standard economy 7 type tariffs that encourages people away from peak times and some different behaviours. Where we've done 2 new things in the last few months, we've launched alongside OVO the world's first type of use tariff. So time of use, price of energy changes every half an hour. With time of use, time of use, the energy cost changes every half hour. With type of use, what you can do, you can have differentially metered bills. So basically you have one bill for your property and all the consumption in your property, and then you have a different bill for the EV charger, and you just take one meter reading from the other. With smart charging, what you can do is trade on the arbitrage and various balance mechanisms and flexibility services and various things there. So what you can actually do is, by controlling when EVs charge, maybe it's just there's an over purchase of energy for a half-hour period. An energy company can't do that on a half-hourly tariff that's advertised in advance. So what they can do, though, is dump that energy somewhere into your EV battery and do it very cheaply. So what we're doing with OVO now is 5p a kilowatt hour any time of day, but they're doing that through pre-purchase agreements and over-purchase of energy and stuff like that. And the other part of this is actually how do you incentivize people? So the other proposition we released recently is something called V1G. So V2G is vehicle 2 grid, where you discharge from vehicle 1 grid is one directional into the car's battery. All the chargers you kind of see at the moment are V1H, as we call them. So they're focused around optimizing for the end user. With V1G, you can optimize for the grid. And what you can do with this is you can start to access some of these revenue services I mentioned previously, so the balance mechanism, frequency response, dynamic containment. But then rather than just keeping that for the system operator, you can actually then share that with the end user. So what we're doing with that is we're giving credits every time we provide one of these services, and we do a charging session over a certain length, you get a point. And right now 20 points is equivalent to a £5 voucher for Amazon. So we've got customers on this now that are now kind of getting kind of £60 to £80 a year extra incentive on top of their tariff savings. So they can still access a time of use tariff or a type of use tariff. And on top of that, they're getting incentivized to be plugged in at the right times and not charging at certain times. So I think, come back to the question, it's all about incentivization, and it's got to be pound notes in the pocket ultimately is where it's going to go to for people. So that's either a saving or it's some kind of return. That's where I think it's going.
Okay, great. We're coming towards the end of our session now, and there's a couple of questions we've had in the Q&As that I just want to return to before we start wrapping up. One very interesting one relating to fusion power station or fusion energy production, which has come from Andy William. I believe, and I'll just read it out. And basically, I'm going to pose this to the audience, to our panel, and see who wants to respond. So there's been a lot of press this week about site selection for fusion prototype power station. It feels like things are starting to become real now. Is a reliable fusion baseline included in any of the long-term models, and should we start to consider it as being viable? So let me see, eeny, meeny, miny, moe. Let's go to Penny first, because she's done the broader energy think piece, and then we'll see if any of our fellow panelists would like to make a contribution.
I'll have to be straight here and say I really don't know.
Okay.
I'd say any panel members who do wave.
Okay, but in the broader piece, I mean, there are going to be other energy production models that could come forward, and being aware of those and how they're incorporated into sort of this future mix of different types of energy is going to be important to keep our eye on, isn't it? And
I think one of the things that my knowledge of fusion power will let me down now, but one of the things that may play into its favour is if the renewables that we have, wind, solar, are very, they change a lot over time. So it may be that fusion might fall into a category of giving us a relatively steady power input into the grid, which might be useful.
I think just to add to that, just from a UK commitment perspective, I think when we think about the investment in research and development, the example in the spotlight in fusion is a really good example of having a vision and an ambition. So the government announced their 10-point plan around doubling down on to be the first country in the world to commercialize fusion energy technology. So I think on a personal note, I see that as good action. But what it does do is reinforce the importance of investing and collaborating in late stage R&D in order to be able to deploy technology at scale. I think it's recognizing that we have had column jet on the national grid system, doing research, and obviously with European counterparts. So I think certainly when I was studying, it was almost 20 years ago. We're still needing to find that commercialization, but what it does speak to is the investment and the focus needed for these new technologies. But certainly I think we should say comfort that we have technologies available today to scale. And this is about how do we kind of provide that platform for the next 50 years, 100 years for future generations. Great, thank you. I won't test any of the other panelists on their knowledge of fusion. But I think perhaps thinking about the broader opportunities that align up with this, today there's a global investment summit going on. And the government have announced 18 deals worth almost £10 billion
of inward investment into the UK, bringing potentially tens of thousands of jobs. And it's linked to sectors that we're talking about, such as wind, hydrogen energy, sustainable homes, carbon capture. From a perspective, I'd welcome sort of a quick round the board, I think, of anybody who wants to comment. What do the panel think of the UK, how well the UK is placed for capturing inward investment in this space, and what are our strengths and what could we do better?
We've been very well supported. We've had several £1 million worth of grants from UK government, and it's to do things which were commercially not viable to do, and there's too much risk associated. So what I'd probably say is I think government are doing enough in some of these areas. I think the cycles are a little bit slow sometimes. Right now, we're told there's probably another vehicle to grid round of funding coming, but it's probably waiting for March for the budgets to come out and everything else to get it in, and that probably delays us from an innovation perspective. But now I think government do enough, but that'd be my one criticism is just the rounds coming back round quick enough. Certainly it's taken the risk away. We'd never have rolled out 1,000 vehicle to grid chargers had we not had 70% of it funded through UK government.
I think I'd second that. I've got several projects on the go with Innovate UK, which is the innovation part of the UK government in facilitating the allocation of funding. And there's always so many projects ongoing, and I think quite a significant budget as well. And as Mike said, they do tend to come out annually, but sometimes you are wondering when exactly they will come out. So there is a bit of a timing challenge, but I think the way that it's managed is great. You know, they've put a lot of investment into the effective monitoring of these projects as well, to really make sure that the money is being spent effectively and it is helping to harbour innovation. So I think I can speak personally from kind of an electric vehicle charge point and innovation side of things, and also energy networks. I think there is quite a lot of funding in the UK that is being used effectively as well.
I'd just like to turn to Sean from being an international organisation and having a production plant in the UK. How does CNH Industrial sort of view the UK as a place to do business?
So I think our experience with the project we did with the APC, we had to explain a lot about agriculture and what we were, because I think it was not in the normal. Even I think the first round we were kicked out because we were not on road. Then with getting to know the right people, then they understood, okay, a lot of the technology is similar in agriculture. And I think for me, it's more agriculture needs solutions and needs to be part of the overall government view to the carbon neutral goal, no? And I think that's something that probably today, I think the UK is getting, but we are still a bit away really for people to understand that farming has changed a lot in the last 20 years and will be part of the solution, whereas still it's seen, I think, a big part of the problem, no? Whereas I think the transport sector is starting to change the perception that there are solutions coming and it's going to be part of the solution. I think agriculture, we still have some work to do to see people to see that we are really part of the long-term solution and a key part of it. And I think, yeah, our cooperation with the APC was very good in the end. And I think for the future, we've started a few more projects now. It also helped us a lot to educate us on the technology and innovation that's happening in the UK. Because we have engineering centers in Italy, in Belgium, in France, where the perception was not such a technologically advanced innovation site in UK. And I think through this project, we've met a lot of counterparts, and like what the investment we made in the startup company was a signal of this. No, that probably it's not globally well enough recognize some of the innovation that's happening in UK today and the technological expertise that we have, particularly in this energy sector. So
there's work to be done in sort of promoting the expertise in this country. Okay, I think it's now time for us to wrap up. I'd like to say a big thank you to our panelists for providing such an interesting discussion about energy and its role in decarbonising transport. The next webinar in the series is going to be on Tuesday, 26th of October, and it's going to be focused on fuel cells in a net zero transport emissions transition. I would finally like to say thank you again to all our panelists and to the audience for participating and asking questions and attending. Do remember that the recording of the webinar will be available on the APC site, and a special thank you to the APC for hosting this series. Thank you very much. I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as I have. Thank you. Goodbye.